Good evening everyone, and most welcome to our 800th Jubilee lecture.
B,
yes. And today we are once back to ABF in the middle of Vårgårda, the nice little village about 30 miles from Gothenburg. And today we are going to talk about dividing lines once more, but where dividing lines are much needed. And whereas the other dividing lines we mentioned need to be flexed a bit, more lenient, and we need to realize that we put them there, these ones are natural, and they are mainly to be pointed to in the body. The body has two different areas, and we mentioned the muscular groups many times during this, well, at least latest 100 to 200 lectures. And those are the two groups that comes in pairs. Neuron 1 together with muscle 1. These are the slow acting muscles that are anaerobic. They take fat as their sustenance. They give a lot of energy and stamina to the system. They do not take an effort. They're not tiresome muscles. They don't give any side products. And the other group is the N2-T2 complex. The N2-T2 complex are the fast twitch muscles. These are the easily reacting muscles and neurons. They are aerobic, so they take oxygen, and their sustenance is not fat as more conveniently available in our fat reservoir, but instead take sugar as its sustenance and leave side products like lactic acid, and that goes for tiredness. This lactic acid is exactly what happens when you are using the wrong sort of muscles, and after about 15 to 20 minutes you get tired and you straighten yourself. This is the action of those muscles. They get tired and you feel your whole body to be tiring. With tiring I mean your body feels heavy and you feel it to be an effort to stand up or to sit down. Those two actions should not be tiresome. It's against the whole system. And if you experience those two things, if you don't feel that you can stand, somebody actually suggested 3 hours. You should be able to stand for 3 hours with no effort at all. It's natural among the animals. Do watch a cow, or even better, a horse. You will see it standing for hours without getting tired. That's the action of a balanced system. And in order to put the system once more into equilibrium, we need to understand that the body is not one thing only. And as I said before, this dividing line we put between soul and matter, body and mind, makes the body into one unitary thing. And that is not reality. The body is actually two. There is a dividing line in the body, and by not using that dividing line, we do injury to the system. And that dividing line could be said to be the dividing line between the two complexes I mentioned earlier. That's a way of seeing it that is a bit of an oversimplification, but for now that will do. We mentioned these things before, and this is why I named this lecture Where Division is Needed. We must forcefully imagine there is a division within the body, and that one we need to put in place. And how do we do that? Yes, we do it by imagining it. As we all know by now, our bodies are constructions from the brain. There's nothing out there. So we can actually influence it. But we can only influence it by imagination. It will not work only by verbal instructions. It needs to be done by imagery. Imagery goes to the right hemisphere, and the right hemisphere is responsible for the creation of the body image. So that's the zest of it. It also have to do, and this is most interesting because there is actually a segue between A and B today here. And that segue is that movement is about the future. And our fixation in the West of a static now, this presence, this reality being in this moment, not the next moment, that has a big role to play here, because all movement, not a single muscular, no matter how minor, how small it is, will always happen in the future. And I thought to myself, how often in my educational system has the future been mentioned or even been trained? And so few times I can't even remember a single one. It seems to be that movement and future are completely banned from our educational system, completely. Whereas, go to the East, you will notice that 80 to 90% of the education is movement, is the future. Because therein, in that part, we can make improvement. And it's also the place for intelligence, knowledge, and intellectual endeavor. Very convenient, because now we understand the criticism of Alan Bloom. What happened? We get more and more into the static, and we start to feel that knowledge is something bad. Knowledge should be banned from education. Knowledge is that old thing called movement. So we are trying, oddly enough, to go into more and more of the representational system. And the representational system take the presence only as its reality. This is the only real thing for representationalism. And that is being enforced so strongly today in the educational system. It has become a fanaticism. Because it doesn't care about body, it doesn't care how we feel, actually is actively attacking the body by putting lights on top of us, by putting our body-mind system in an environment that kills off all intellectual life, trying to get rid of knowledge. I actually remember one of my teachers from philosophy said, "It's nothing new under the sun." And by that he meant there is nothing to be learned. There's no progression. There is a suspicion of everything that is learning. Everything should be now. It's like Socrates in the dialogues where he shows there's nothing to learn at all. Everything is already out there. And no wonder our intellectual life has gone down dramatically just the 4 last decades. I was looking previously on the internet, and it's not going down like this. It is rather going down like this. we are losing our intelligence, we are losing our intellectual life, and we are becoming parrots, repeating what's around us and seeing that as the only good thing. Everything else is bad. All knowledge should be banned, like a scapegoat. And we should all become like lifeless, intentionless machines. Because in a way, intention and future goes hand in hand. Where is the place for intention? Do we find intention in the present? No, we don't find any intention in the present. Because in the present, everything is done. Intention goes 100% into the future. It's all to do with movement. So we have an educational system who doesn't care at all about intention. Well, it's no wonder, because the big ideology today is determinism. Everything is determined. We mentioned earlier here, just chatting me and my dear colleague Kalle about some brilliant person, very smart guy, who admired to some extent the famous biologist and DNA theoretist Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins' theory is very interesting, but it's obviously, when you read it, everything that has anything to do with human will is banned from his theory. Human will has nothing to see with any development at all. And when I read it many years ago, like 30 years ago, when I actually was completely into representationalism, and I thought logic was the best thing we could have, and analytical philosophy was my banner, so to speak. But I could not digest Richard Dawkins, because I was thinking to myself, doesn't the chap realize there's no will in his theory? How can he ban will? Is he supposed to think that by having this ideology, that won't have an effect on people? Because it's the will that creates everything in this world. And it's the will that created the university that gave the money to Richard Dawkins so he could do his research. It was will that put his book into print. It's will that got it distributed. Will changes everything. Things do not happen by themselves. And to pointing to some gene somewhere, he didn't even know how it was constructed, is like pointing somewhere else. Bill did it. If somebody accuses me for something, I say Bill that it is. Almost an idiom in English, Bill did it. It's absolute nonsense, I'd say. Human will is the most important. And by not recognizing that and building this stable representational model of reality, what he can do with this theory is to enforce passivity. It says that everything is done and your will doesn't matter. Of course it matters, it's an obvious fact. You only have to be awake 5 minutes until you understand it takes me will to get up in the morning to do the things I want to do. I need to strengthen my will every time. Otherwise, it will become weaker. And everything I will do will become weaker as well. It seems that the good fellow doesn't even understand what drives him, because there must be a will that even drove Richard Dawkins. But it's completely absent in his theory. It doesn't play any role. He is only pointing to all this mysterious gene that's supposed to do everything. So you see, our thinking about ourselves and our world does have an effect. And this is one of those things that need to be willed. Imagery won't come to our inner vision without willpower. And that's a willpower that needs to be strengthened every day. Because it's not like you can just have imagery in your mind. It's completely dependent on how much you train your willpower. because imagery is movement. All pictures, all imagery is movement. Otherwise, it will just be a reflection of something that does no longer exist, because even the now is too late. It's like half a second too late. The representational idea has a lot of weak points, and this is one of them. And it's the passivity, that you wait. You let perception come to you. We know today perception is something will constructed. If you have less will, you will see less things. It's not out there for everyone. So the passivity is built into the system, and this is one of the reasons that we lost knowledge about the division. This division is, as I so often mentioned before, completely obvious when it comes to some of the primitive people. They all use this division and use it very clearly, and it needs to be enforced. And if you look in different systems, you can find it in Chinese culture, or Chinese medicinal and biological knowledge. And the division goes between yin and yang. And this division is also the same thing as Ha and Ta division within the Vedic system, often referred to as the sun and the moon division. And that division is excruciatingly important. And whereas I earlier mentioned neurology, today is the great inventor John Appleton's time, because he constructed the first Western system for this division. And he actually used evolution as a start, looking how animals from a lower grade to a higher and higher complexity use this division. And oddly enough, the division has to do with very much what we mentioned before, the Ha and the Ta. One of the areas are directed to the earth. It's earthbound. That's the moon part. This is what we usually call the ventral. The ventral in less complicated organisms, I usually do a half circle like that. All the muscular power in this animal is down here. It could be a simple unicellular organism or a multicellular organism. Some sort of slug is usually a good thing. This area will not have muscular tension, it will expand. So this idea is expansion up and sort of more tension down. Muscular tension here, expansion here. And this model goes to more and more complex animals. It goes to animals with a spine. For instance, one of the most primitive ones is the lamprey. In the lamprey, this is half of the lamprey is the tensed part, and the other half is the expanding part. So this is how we move, or in a lamprey it's very obvious, because one part of the whole body system is expanding, whereas the other one is contracting. And this is the movement. And it looks like this. When lampreys got more developed, the lampreys do have spine, but they're not proper fishes. When it gets developed into fish, this movement goes into the fins as well. So you have a construction of fins, and the system remains the same, with the same movement also for the fish. And from fish we go up to land, and there we found lizards. 1 or 2 pairs of the fins have developed into legs, or the first primitive legs. There are actually intermediate models you can look at. Those are very good. There are something in between a fish and a lizard. And one of these animals is actually called Clevastfienning. It's very interesting to have a look at them. It's a rather big fish with an interesting history on its own. It remained undiscovered until very recently, although it was a really big fish. And I think that's interesting in itself. But I won't stride into that area now. Maybe I'm going to put a link somewhere in the description for that. It's very interesting. Then you went over to lizards, and from lizards you had snakes. Yes, lizards are before snakes. It's odd. You can think lizards, how can they be before snakes? Snakes don't have any legs. Well, it's actually the opposite. Snakes devolved their legs, so they disappeared into the body. Some other snakes actually do have leg remnants, not really used anymore, but the movement is the same. It's the same thing with contraction and expansion. I think it gets more obvious how this thing is not a static thing only. It is also a movement at the same time. You see once more here, this division, if it gets too stable between movement and static, it makes things a bit confusing. So we need to move around here too. And as you remember, our heritage, I won't mention it, this is the moral lecture of John August Appleton, but our heritage makes it difficult with those things. And as we all know, Greeks did not like movement at all. They thought it was odd, maybe not part of reality. I think this is going to help, that static and movement can be the same thing. And John Appleton, I think, I'm not 100% sure, he calls it a static wave. Static wave. So you see here, what we believe does have an effect in our very movement. And I'm just going to show you a little bit how this works. Here you say this lovely article written by John Appleton together with Pete Green, both of whom we've been in contact before. And I especially like this flying squirrel. And here is obvious where is the ventral and where is the dorsal. There's some modification when it comes to the head. It's still the same. And there is a wave going on here in this, I don't know what to call it, wings maybe. It's the most interesting animal. It is a mammal. It's not a bat. Well, bat is a mammal as well. But it's not a bird, and it's more developed than a bat. In the stingray, you can see it also very obviously. The upper part is the dorsal one, and the under part is the ventral one. This is the tensing part. This is the one that's facing the ground.
So it's an imaginary animal?
No.
It's real?
Yeah. It's
Close to bear? Okay.
It's the most real animal. Actually, it makes up a delicious food as well. You can probably have it in Italy when you go there. These animals can actually fly in the air as well. So this is not something I've seen in my life, but it's most interesting. And you see how they are not wings, but they are moving because of this expansion and contraction movement. They're not moving because it's flapping, those things. They are actually part of the movement. And this is how we work as well. We usually think that arms and legs are something we flap or Well, yeah, I think this analogy is better. Some people think that birds are flying with their wings, but they're not. It's the movement in the body that makes the wings fly. And we are similar in that way. We think that we move about with the legs and the arms, especially the legs. And that could be very obvious when you swim, when you crawl, for instance. You will directly see a swimmer who understands it's the body that makes the legs and the arms move. It's not the legs and the arms that get the person to his position. And you see here the connection, what we mentioned before, with the spine. The spine starts all movements. Here it's actually easier to understand and also easier to imagine, because you start realizing what is movement. Is movement flapping with the arms and the legs? Do you really believe a bird is flying with its wing? Or is it the body that's moving and that makes the wings move? Well, I would say the answer is completely 100% obvious, because how could it sort of ignore the development that's been for 1,000,000, 100, 5, 1,000 million years? Why would a bird be the exception? Well, if you ask an ornithologist, he would say, of course it's not. No sane person says a bird flies with its wings. It flies exactly in the same way as a fish. And think about a snake, the development of the lizard, and you will see it moves only with its spine, only with its body. With the static wave is the thing that takes the snake from one place to another. And here with the stingray, it's most obvious. I really like this article. Let's see if I can find an extra nice. Some of these. Well, here this is a comparison between this flying squirrel and Superman, and this little child with the Superman costume. And you can think about this cape as being our wings, or this part. This is the cape of the flying squirrel. Think about this as our movement device. And then you realize how the spine or the body, John Appleton usually thinks about the body, but it makes a lot more sense in this description, because only talking about the spine, one problem you get into, how do you explain spineless animals? They don't have a spine. But the movement is completely the same in all animals. There's no exception to it. And let me give you an example here. I'm going to sit in the chair. And I have an idea here I put into my mind because of all this influence we have around on coming from the Greek. And I have come to the belief, when I have to get up of the chair, it's the legs that takes me up. And already we have a big problem there, because my imagery is now towards the legs. Legs are secondary. They are derived from the body. We understand that by looking at the evolutionary chart. What I will do is tense my legs mainly here and here to get up. And I will ignore the important division that actually takes me up. And that division is between ventral and dorsal. I get up like this, and it didn't look really agile. And of course, be hard to me to imagine very directly, but give me a second, I'm going to try to impose the idea of a seam, of a division. Division to keeping parts separated, which I put together by my own thinking process. And I think that made for a smoother movement. Yes, it is smoother. So you see a difference rather directly. And the line goes here, up here, down here, and here it changes direction. So from the back being dorsal, it goes to making the front of the leg dorsal. And these things has to do with the way human beings were developed from quadruped animals. And that's a little bit complicated to think of, but we have the same division. And all primitive man do make the same division constantly. And they train it constantly by moving in such a way. So that enforce the imagery every time they do it. So you can go two different ways. Either you're moving in a way that will enforce the thinking will enforce the idea of the body being one whole. And this is one whole, and arms or leg are just put on this system. They came afterwards, they fell from the sky, we might say, to make it even more ridiculous. So arms and legs were, so to speak, developed after the whole body, which is not the evolutionary model. And the more you think about it, every time you think correctly, you will move more correctly, and your thinking will be more correctly as well, because the thinking, and this is the nice point with this is how it goes hand in hand. The thinking corresponds. We have neural activity that is exactly the same as the muscular activity. And these actually stem from one unicellular unit from the beginning. Neurons and muscles were not different from the start. So there is another division that's a tough nut to crack. And I think to lighten my colleague up a bit, we can ask him to sit down in a bit here.
Pause.
Put a pause. So I asked my colleague Kalle here to sit down in the chair, and we're going to try a little experiment here. And the difference we want to pinpoint here is doing thinking as a movement in contrast as thinking as something representational. And the difference is one is more action and the other one is more static, so to speak. So the thought in itself should move in a way, because our whole organism is in fact movement in that way. It always have been movement, and in the simpler unicellular organism, thinking and movement is exactly the same. And I think this staticness is the thing. Let me show me, and this is going to be a very simple demonstration where the line goes. It goes up to here to the hand, and it goes into the hand, and it goes in between the fingers like this being the ventral, this being the dorsal, and the ventral is more ticklish, whereas the dorsal is less ticklish. And this is obvious when you take this part. You can take even a cat or a dog or a hamster or a guinea pig or any animal. This is more, so to speak, ticklish, thinner skin here, whereas this part is not so ticklish. You tickle small babies, you should tickle them over the stomach or this area, it's more ticklish. And the same goes with the front of the legs, less ticklish. Back of the leg is ticklish. So it's because we are bipedal, stand on two legs, there's a change going on here in this area. So this changes over here, and this goes over here to the back. This changes right here. And that region is very hard to imagine when you need to train. Our imagery is going to get clearer and clearer, but do not ever think you can just have an image in your head and it's clear. That takes loads of training because imagery is always action. And that's actually something I learned by drawing, to understand there's nothing static about the drawing. Drawing is as exact as the movement I do with my hand. It's absolutely connected. And I think it's this lingering on of an idea of representationalism, that if I draw in a correct way, so to speak, correct way of reality, that's going to be a depiction of reality. That's not the case. All drawings are movement, nothing else. Although it can sometimes be very hard to see, especially in this modern time and age when you have all these computer programs, you can make depictions anyway, just pressing your finger. The movement is still there. And this is what we need with the thinking. It's not representational thinking. It is a movement. So you need to move and think at the same time. And start to realize there's a dividing line. Either you can do it in a good way, and that means for every time you repeat the good way, it becomes a little bit better. Or you can do it in a static way. That means that you will reinforce this idea for every time you do it in a static way. So we go in different directions. Everything here is gradual. And at first the difference will be minuscule, going in the right direction in comparison to the wrong direction. But it could be seen anyway, because especially in human beings we have big things like heads, and this part is rather big. So it can be visible for some people, but it would take some more time before we can internalize that realization. I think we usually note it in the things we are doing, that the things we are doing becoming better, our thinking is becoming better, and our movement is becoming looser and better. So try to sort of get an idea of this moving thing, especially the stingray. And this time I'm trying to link the stingray video I also have, which is very good, to see how it moves, and you understand the body is doing the movement, not the wings. You don't move with the wings. And usually cartoonists think it's very funny to write a bird that's trying to fly with its wings. It looks awful. But human beings actually try to move with their legs. It should come from the body, because the body is the one that has the movement. So with that in mind, just think about that and get up with the idea of the division. And we can clearly see the movement here going on. You can get down again. Let your arms loose. Yeah, even better, yeah. It's wondrous. Thank you very much. You see actually here on the video that the arms and the legs are moving with the body. It becomes obvious, even more so after I had held the lecture here. I understand it more. The more we understand this principle, the easier it will be to see that the legs and the arms are not attached to the body afterwards. They grew out of the very same thing, and the movement in the body is the movement of the arms and the leg, and not the opposite. So you see here, by getting rid of this static division, we can get a much clearer picture, and we can actually once more have definite things. It's made impossible by this static division to have anything certain, anything clear, everything is wishy-washy, unclear, babbling. This is clear thinking. This is something that is direct, pertinent, and functioning. And get up again, Kalle. Just think about the stingray or something like that. Think about a stingray getting up on the chair. And just get up like a stingray. Yeah, it's much better. Wow. You see the difference here. It's not that hard to see in some instances. And I think it really helps that we're a bit tired here today as well. Because then we tend to relax the ideas of having to perform. Well, that concludes our lecture 800B. I say thank you very much to my colleague. Well done. Thank you, everybody. And it looks even more and more like a stingray. Cheers.